So I lead the Kindred Futures, which is a sort of strategic or transformational innovation arm of the Kindred Group. My job really is to look a couple of years into the future and try and identify and understand the trends and technologies that may impact, both positively and negatively, the group, but the gambling industry as a whole. And then try and develop responses or options for the group. But because the last few years has been good to and good for the gambling industry, my job can be a little frustrating. I sometimes feel as though I'm knocking my head against a brick wall, and I try and discuss or communicate some of the trends and impacts that I'm seeing. We're all very heavily invested in the status quo. The model is working, it's working well. So if I'm knocking on doors, trying to paint a picture of a potentially very different future, I quite often meet with resistance, rejection, even fear sometimes. Which is why I'm actually really excited to have been invited to come and talk at this Disruption Scary Things session to an audience that I hope is interested in hearing about how the future of our industry could be very different, and in the not too distant future. So I'm going to talk about your brand, why your brand, or a consumer-facing brand, the visible manifestation of it, is on the verge of disappearance from view. And that this will challenge everything an operator or you think you know about using a brand to drive customer acquisition, customer engagement, and customer loyalty. And despite the millions and millions of dollars that we all spend on high-profile marketing campaigns, associations with sports stars, sponsorships of major events, that there is almost nothing you can do to stop the disappearance from view. The very nature of digital interaction is on the verge of change. The websites and apps that we use to turn that marketing spend into revenue, to interact and transact with our customers, and to drive value from our brands are beginning to recede in importance. And they are to be replaced, or they are being replaced, by messaging channels as the primary method of interacting with customers. Now, I think this is a fundamental shift that is going to have a really fundamental impact. Because in a messaging channel, there is no space for your brand. So this presentation is about exactly that. Digital interaction is on the verge of major change. Brands are going to be squeezed from view. Old strategies need to be revisited, rethought, rewritten, if you want to continue to remain relevant to your customers, visible to your customers, if you want to continue to grow and acquire new customers. I want this presentation to make you think, what does this mean for you, for your brand? How will I remain visible or relevant in such a future? But I can't emphasize enough, the impact on brands is going to be huge. But I think there are some positives, and significant positives here. The opportunity to build new, engaging experience types, more intimate, more personal experiences. So I think it's scary, it's disruptive, but also a great opportunity. The shift away from websites and apps to messaging channels, put it like that, it doesn't sound very dramatic. It doesn't sound very disruptive. You may be sitting there thinking, I'm overselling this, or tempted to dismiss what I'm saying entirely. But I think you'd be very wrong to do so. Mark Zuckerberg, a man who knows a little about digital interaction, famously said this: messaging channels are the new face of social and mobile. But that was back in 2014. Since then, he has added 1 billion monthly active users to his platform, Facebook Messenger. So his prediction from 2014 is unquestionably coming true. And his vision for Facebook Messenger is that it becomes the primary interface, the primary channel between consumers and brands, products, and services, replacing the websites and apps that we've all come to rely on. I don't know if you saw this a few weeks ago. Facebook announced they're going to be broadcasting or streaming the Champions League live in the US to start with, but one can imagine they have global ambitions. If you see this, the relevance for Messenger and sports betting is immediately obvious. if you're watching the Champions League in Facebook, what would be more natural, more obvious than to place bets on it within Facebook Messenger? But not only placing bets, depositing to your account, picking up data, insights, registering for a new account possibly, generally interacting with your bookmaker. Now, Mark Zuckerberg openly borrowed his vision for Facebook Messenger from China, from the WeChat model. WeChat, the icon on the left, also has about 1 billion monthly active users, and it's kind of the Chinese forerunner for Facebook Messenger. It's how Chinese consumers interact with each other, but also how they interact with brands and services. Having a transactional presence on WeChat is far more important for a brand in China than having a website or an app. There's also WhatsApp, a similar number of monthly active users. Kik, Twitter, Skype, smaller, but significant nonetheless. And then, of course, the voice messaging interfaces, virtual assistants. Amazon Alexa, I think, was the biggest seller on Prime Day on Tuesday. Google Home, and the very relatively recently announced HomePod from Apple. These virtual assistants are replacing the need to interact with websites and apps in the traditional way. But it's these companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, who really do determine how we interact digitally. And they're pouring billions and billions of dollars into this kind of technology to make it a success. Which is why I said at the beginning, there's almost nothing you can do about this. You may not like it, it may not suit you, you may think your website and app is particularly cool or special, or it doesn't really matter. These interfaces are how these companies see the future of digital interaction. The status quo is very much changing. A little further evidence from Gartner, a few snips. 20% of businesses will abandon their apps by 2019. That is less than 18 months away, less than one annual budget cycle. 85% of businesses' relationships will be managed by virtual assistants by 2020, 2.5 years ago. This is not long-term horizon stuff. This is soon. This is coming. So for that reason, sorry, one more little quote rather than evidence from the chief marketing officer of a company called Artificial Solutions. Admittedly, they're a vendor in this space, but he says that natural language technology will be as critical to an enterprise of 2020 as a website is today. Which, a bold claim, you may think, but take heed. Don't dismiss what I'm saying. I'm not overselling this. This is happening, it's coming, and your digital strategies, your strategies do need to start encompassing it. But it's crucial to note at this point that messaging channels are not just another channel. They represent a fundamental change in the way you would interact with customers, the way you'd deliver your products and services to customers, and the way you'd create value from your brand. It's an opportunity to build great new experiences, to be in the channel that your customers want to be in. I think the last presentation showed where people spend their time in apps. It's not betting companies' apps, it's these companies' apps. So be in the channel that your customers want to be in, and add value to them in that channel. Facebook, for instance, Facebook Messenger, your brand can be invited to a group chat. You can add value to that group chat. Amazon Alexa, it's always on, it's always listening. What would be more natural? Sitting at home, watching a game, placing a bet with Amazon Alexa. A frictionless, seamless, effortless experience that you can deliver to your customers. But, and there's got to be a but, in a messaging channel, there is almost no space for your brand. There's no screen space to speak of. So how do you present your brand? How do you create and reinforce your brand's position? And how do you differentiate your brand? You can see here the Wall Street Journal's mobile web page. It's pretty clear at the top. It's the Wall Street Journal. Well, in the messaging interface, you can just about see a tiny little icon or tiny logo. Visually, it's very limited. It's even more stark with Paddy Power. Their mobile web pages, the brand is absolutely front and center. There's no escaping it. But on the right, their messaging interface, it's barely present at all. The outward visual expression of a brand is an utterly crucial component of that brand's identity and the brand's position. And this actually gets worse with Alexa or the other voice assistants. If you're putting 20 quid on Chelsea to win with Ladbrokes or with Paddy Power, it's a virtually identical experience. And it's entirely transactional. And where is the value-adding layer? Where's the differentiation? So product differentiation has long been acknowledged to be quite difficult in this industry. But with the changing nature of digital interaction, the move to messaging channels, brand differentiation is also going to become quite difficult. So if you don't have product differentiation and you don't have brand differentiation, I think you can see there are definitely challenges ahead. But if that wasn't enough, there's another layer that I think is relevant to consider. Gambling advertising has already been banned during some sporting events in Australia. The UK Culture Secretary recently announced a desire to review the almost blanket coverage of gambling ads on TV. And very recently, the FA prematurely ended their association with Ladbrokes. So could this be the thin end of the wedge? TV ads are banned, maybe print ads are banned, sponsorship is banned. All of this will further impact a gambling company's ability to present its brand. So I think maybe there's a perfect storm brewing. You've got no TV, no print, no sponsorships, and the rapid rise of messaging interfaces, or the brand restricting messaging interfaces, really causing problems. How do you promote your brand in such circumstances? Well, I don't want to paint too gloomy a picture now, but if you think back to the days when cigarette advertising was pervasive, it's just Marlboro, the brand here is huge, right? It's rugged, it's tough, it's macho. Those were the values that the brand traded on, and unmistakably so. And that came across in their sponsorship of the McLaren Formula One team. The brand is all over the car, all over the drivers, with Prost, but also Senna, Lauda, and others. There was huge brand awareness, huge brand identity. But now, the outward expression of the Marlboro brand is that. It's a disturbing image of a cancer patient. So I'm not for a moment comparing the cigarette industry to the gambling industry, but just using it as an example of what can happen if the outward expression of a brand is restricted. Okay, so I appreciate what I've said is, I don't know, maybe challenging or uncomfortable. And there's actually an easy counter to it. A lot of the messaging interfaces that you may have used already or seen out there are basic, and some actually pretty shitty. And it doesn't take too many, I'm sorry I don't understand, from Alexa to make you think, maybe there's not so much in this channel after all. But it's really not easy to build a messaging interface. Conversational UI is new, it's different, and actually there are still plenty of bad interfaces on websites and apps. If you just think about how many different ways there are to say hello, let alone the nuanced colloquial language that the average punter is going to use. The basics, play a playlist from Spotify, what's the weather like, pretty straightforward. But placing bets, asking for odds, building accumulators, actually much more complicated stuff. And this bet on the right would have been a great bet a couple of weeks ago if Alexa had managed to understand it. Natural language technology, the technology that underpins the understanding of in these interfaces, is not available off the shelf. Siri can't help you here. You need to start now. You need to start putting as much effort into developing a conversational user interface as you do into a web or app interface. You need to start thinking about the potential impact on your brand and creating strategies to deal and cope with it. And most importantly, you need to start exploring some of the enabling technology that underpins all of this. The answer is very much not on the shelf. So just to wrap up, digital interaction is changing. Messaging interfaces will increasingly replace traditional websites and apps for all sorts of purposes. Google, Facebook, Apple are pouring billions of dollars into making this happen. There's an opportunity, if you get it right, to create really valuable new experiences, but your brand will be impacted. The ability to outwardly express your brand will increasingly disappear, and it'll get harder and harder to build and drive brand value in the traditional way. And then without a visible brand, how different are you really from your competitors? And I'm going to finish with a quote and a question. By 2020, the average person will have more conversations with bots than with their spouse. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know, maybe it depends on your spouse. And then finally, just to leave you with this, how will customers have a conversation with your brand?